Welcome to the Hardtech Podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the Hardtech Podcast. You've got me, Grant Chapman, and today I've got Drew Westrick co-hosting today, so CTO is back in the seat.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Hi, everybody.
Yep, and we've got Kelly Roman in-house from New York, traveled all the way here to visit us. So he's working on an awesome new medical device in the space of brain stimulation between depression, anxiety, insomnia, and some other cool things possibly coming down the line. Kelly, thanks for coming in.
Oh, it was great to be here. Easy trip.
Easy trip, easy. Well, I'd love to start off this podcast with some of your story of, hey, how do you get to Fisher Wallace? What has Fisher Wallace been doing? And we'll kind of jump into the deep end. Yeah,
I had a very unexpected path to med tech. So my brother is actually a research scientist. So my brother is a professor at Downstate Medical School. And he teaches cell biology. So, growing up, he's 12 years older. I was, exposed to all of his research. He would take me to his lab. So I was comfortable, speaking with scientists, reading journal articles. As I was older, I was reading what he was publishing. But I took a very much of a humanities path. I went to Harvard, English major, worked at a couple tech, digital media startups, one that was Union Square Venture backed at the time. It was a little company called Oddcast, where we were actually one of the first offices to use Twitter, because Union Square Ventures was one of the early backers of Twitter. So I worked on early social media. So I brought Bebo to Billboard platform, and Bebo was acquired by AOL. You probably never heard of them, but at the time they were big social media. So that was kind of my beginnings in social and digital media. I then wrote a book for HarperCollins, a graphic novel. It was really a passion project. I actually turned down a pretty senior role at Bebo. They poached me out of the Billboard side and turned it down to do this book. And then Art of War, I adapted The Art of War, which is actually a pretty relevant prep process for business.
We were joking at lunch about this. I was like, "Are you sure you're writing nonfiction or fiction?" Right, right.
It was very much nonfiction. And then I met my co-founder, who had acquired this brain stimulation technology from the engineers, who had actually passed away, brothers, and I had taken antidepressants in my 20s, had rapidly unpleasant side effects, stopped taking them. He handed me this device, which was seemed pretty crude and prototypey, but boy, it worked with me. This is in 2009, so Fitbit was just getting going. The whole word wearable was very new, and I just felt like this is one of those things where if we can really prove out the science, it felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity just to be able to actually own that technology, because I'm not a researcher. So I just went all in. First 6 months I was a little bit arm's length, and then after 6 months I was all in.
Yeah, that's great.
And so that was almost 17 years ago. So we've spent vast majority of the time running clinical trials and product development, but because of I won't call it a loophole, but because of an archaic FDA pathway that we were the only brain stimulation device to take advantage of, we were able to market this research device from the moment that I started in 2009 all the way to 2023. And so we were running research with a research device while distributing it. And then what we're doing now is we're taking all of that data and learnings. We've perfected the device, filed new patents, and ran it. We ran the version 2 through 5 trials. And we're now should be months away from FDA clearance for anxiety, and then we're running. We may be about a year away from depression, and then insomnia. So we've already done significant amount of research on all three of those things. The anxiety study that we've done is enough to get through the FDA process. We certainly think so. We've already been through it with the previous version. FDA knows us very well, and we had a home run in that study. We had 165 first responders run 8 weeks through this anxiety study with outstanding results, and so now we're pivoting both in terms of technology. It's perfected technology, also the form factor. We've went from this kind of very basic, minimally viable product type of design, which is we're still using today because it has a lot of utility, but has external wires. It looks very hospital-like, and we've moved into a very consumer-y form factor, although it's still going to be a prescription device, reimbursed, et cetera. But we worked with the designers of Beats and Nest.
Mm-hmm.
And
did you say like highly effective, but certainly has some usability issues? Is that what you guys are mainly pivoting towards now?
It was more about the only usability issue was having wires hanging down from like a handheld pulse generator to electrodes on either side of the head. You have these wires, and so they can get in the way of doing things like if you're cooking dinner.
Yeah.
So the new form factor is completely on the head, and but it's more about approachability, creating desire, and very much taking a page out of Beats headphones,
Sure.
which we want to give people an object that they will naturally feel proud wearing and build awareness for.
Sort of meshing like a lifestyle product, almost like with a clinical or like a med device. Is that how you would characterize it?
Yeah, to the highest extent. I mean, the depression indication that we're going after next is a class 3, so class 3 device.
Yeah,
the highest level PMA. Anxiety is class 2, insomnia is class 2, but very much hardcore, need a clinical trial prescription device, but this very consumer-y
for the
factor.
Listeners, what makes that so hard? Like, why is that a class 3 device in your mind?
So class 3 is typically reserved for devices that are addressing something life-threatening, that are implanted, that pose serious risk.
Yeah, because it seems like for a wearable, that's. I mean, I know
extreme.
this, so I'm trying to lead the listeners a little bit here. Like,
Yeah.
to your point, exactly that, right? Like, it seems kind of severe, but is it mainly because the danger of not being effective is so high? Like, you have to really prove that you're solving that particular problem.
Yeah,
Is that it?
There's two levels to it. One is when the FDA modernized the regulation, there wasn't enough depression research in this category for them to be able to put it into class 2. So if there had been more research done in depression that was convincing, they probably would have put it into class 2. But because there wasn't enough, and this is how they stated it in the regs, like in the final order, they didn't have enough data to put it into class 2, so they had to put it into class 3 is what their rationale was. Now, because of our study that we published in 2024, you could argue that there is enough data to put it into class 2. And if we wanted to pick a fight, I would say, and we could file a reclassification petition with the FDA and say, actually, this should be in class 2 now because there is enough data for you to create special controls.
Yeah.
But why do that if you can get through the PMA?
Well, that's
That
what
makes
I'm
sense.
saying. You're digging your own moat now.
Right,
By
right.
not filling it back in and making it shallower for everyone else, you already had to dig the moat. You might as well live inside of it.
Well, and it's not even for the self-interest. That's just certainly true, but it's also I want it to be, say, FDA approved, not FDA cleared. And you can only say FDA approved for medical device if it's class 3. If it's not class 3,
that's a good
people
point.
will say approved when it's not. Like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, you go into the clinic to get it. That's FDA cleared. Some people refer to it as approved, but it's cleared. And I think having that approval, and also the data requirements for class 3 are higher. So you have to have like a sham-controlled, they want to see at least a 10-week study that's sham-controlled.
And
So
can we talk about sham for everyone listening?
Yeah.
'Cause you and I talked about this on our last call. That,
placebo. Yeah.
But because you're studying mental health issue, which is anxiety or depression,
Yep.
your personal experience by being in a study might change your anxiety and your depression because you're receiving some amount of care, that it is a placebo effect, that it's not the thing they're testing that makes you feel happier or less depressed or less anxious during that time, is that you're seeing a clinician and meeting with them and talking with them, and that might be enough to move the score.
In false positives or false negatives, right? It could also be that like, oh, I'm being monitored. I'm being a little more like self-reflective. Like maybe I feel more anxious just because I'm focusing on whether or not I feel anxious, right? Like that also could possibly be a side effect of participating in this study.
It's certainly possible. I think but you typically see it the first way described, where there is a treatment effect from being in a study, and then there's like a force multiplier of creating a self-care routine with our device. So, or with if you're carving out 20 minutes a day or 20 minutes in the morning and evening, and you've never created a self-care routine before, so not only you're in a trial, but you're now creating a self-care routine. That may not provide a placebo effect 3, 6, 9, 12 months later, but it certainly will in the first 4 weeks, or and usually in the first 12. And you start to see washout, but because these trials are so expensive, and people want to get approved, they don't want to run a trial for a year. That's prohibitively expensive.
Sure.
So you do have to strategically bake in a very high placebo effect in any mental health trial. Now, you actually see that placebo effect is much higher in a home-based study, in a remote study, than a in-clinic study. And we've seen this. So we published a bipolar depression study with our device that was done out at Beth Israel Mount Sinai. And the placebo effect was actually quite small. We beat placebo. It was, I think, if I remember correctly, it was it was a 9.5 point difference on the Beck, and I think we got 13 points reduction in active. So it's like a 13 to a 4, right? And so 4 points improvement versus 13 points improvement placebo active. In an at-home study, the separation that we had in our published study in 2024 was only 5 points. So almost half of what it was in an on-site. And when you're going into the dentist, it's like it's different than when you're at home creating a self-care routine, right? Yeah. So there's so doing it at home is even a bigger challenge. On-site costs more. On-site is not really the use case to begin with. So the use case that we're building for is personal home use. Now, 5 points is still twice what an SSRI is. So I don't. Maybe some people know this, but the difference between placebo and active in a drug trial is incredibly razor thin.
I mean, what is it?
Well, it's 2.5 points is what the average SSRI separation is between. I mean, which is why these drug studies have like thousands of subjects, because you need to, if that's how small your separation is, to get statistical significance, you need lots of people.
Right. So
again, with a startup med device company, you can't afford thousands of subjects because you're talking minimum $5,000-$6,000 per subject. Mm-hmm. Max, you could spend $10,000 easily in a on-site study.
Right.
Well, so you have these limiting factors that just make it even harder to beat sham.
Well, and let's open this up, because I think the thing I'd love to talk about in the podcast for all the listeners is like, how do you design a good study for a device that needs a sham that can't just be a sugar pill, right? When you're doing a sham with pharmaceuticals, it's easy. There's two pills. They both look white. One is sugar. One is the actual drug. Yeah. There's no difference. For your hardware device, you have to have a device. It has to light up and turn on, right? The user has to be not just plausibly convinced, absolutely convinced that they are not in the sham study.
They test for it.
Right? They have to believe they're getting, that this is the real device.
They ask them, yep.
And so I think, generating these, studies is such a hard part of the design of a product experience that's a med device. And for you, it is even harder because your device, you feel it. You're getting stimulation. How did you guys design the sham versus the real, and what was maybe we can't even say this out loud, but what is the control behind the scenes? What's different?
Well, you actually don't feel it, and that is what's extremely hard to do with neurostim. So one of our carrier waveform, what separates our device from every other one, is we use a carrier waveform that is orders of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude more than typical, and so that.
And it's in frequency.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 orders of magnitude faster.
So it's not a radio signal, but it's kind of the same concept of radio, where you can get through concrete wall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been able to kind of get less or to get electricity without having to use a lot of electricity. We can get it through the skull and in a way that you don't feel, and so that allowed us to have a successful blinding assessment, which is what you're talking about. We use something called the James Blinding Index. And more people in the 2024 depression study, more people who were on sham thought they had active.
That's hilarious.
No,
That's wild.
It was not it was still like not a, we were fine. Like overall, it was about equal, but like a handful more people thought that they had active who were in sham. It's just a great example of how what that basically proves is that our active device is as comfortable as one that does not emit electricity.
Well, and you had better outcomes.
So
this thing,
the outcomes were better, but the sensation was the same.
And that's what's so cool is you have a device that's indistinguishable from the sham from like a wearable perspective.
Right.
Like it's comfortable
A
to wear
sensitivity
this is easily,
perspective.
easily everyone's in the same boat.
Yeah.
But you got the data from the same study that it works.
Yes.
And again, from anyone else that's been looking at studies in STEM or other these I'll call hard to classify studies, you hit both categories, which had you only hit one of them, believability gets hard.
Yeah, and it's to the point with neurostim that the FDA, we have one competitor that's gotten through FDA, and they actually let them through even though they failed the blinding assessment, which is more like an act of compassion. I mean, I think as long as you don't have serious side effects, there's certainly an argument to be made that even if you're questioning the outcomes because the blinding didn't work and people knew they had sham or active, the benefits can still outweigh the risk, and that's what the FDA basically said. Is you're saying we know how hard it is to blind neurostim, as long as the benefit outweighs the risk. But they still had to supply them with a 10-week, fairly high subject, with a sham control, and we did have a successful blinding. So, and we did have much higher response rates than the competitor. I'm not going to name a competitor, but. We feel very confident going into the depression approval process.
Does the FDA look easier or harder at efficacy based on the severity of what you're treating? So to give you an example, it's like, and again, I'm maybe talking about depth here, but it's like, anxiety generally, isn't necessarily as, say, life-threatening as, say, like 100%. Severe depression, right?
Yep.
So when it comes to that, what you're treating, does that also have like an impact on like how much efficacy you really have to show, right? Because I would think that your device would have to show really high levels of efficacy, say for like depression, because the alternative is like if you prescribe this device as a treatment for depression, but it fails, really bad outcome there, versus if you prescribe a device to treat anxiety, it's like, okay, well, you're sort of just about as anxious as you were before being treated. Do they look at those two things differently? Like, do they look at like severity of the outcomes or non-treatment versus treatment? Like, how do they take that into account? Is that by class? Is that by how the studies are actually set up? Is that by how much efficacy you have to prove to get approval? How does that play in?
Yeah, some of it's a little anti-intuitive. So the other reason, I didn't really get into the other side, I talked about the lack of data, which is why the FDA put it in class 3 for depression. But the other reason is that with depression, their fear is, all right, if you don't have great effectiveness data, to your point, and something actually doesn't work, then you actually, in patients with severe depression, you have a risk of suicide. So there is a existential risk here for the patient. Not in all patients. I mean, not all patients are there's a big difference between suicidal ideation, like someone thinking about it, versus someone who's planned it or someone who's acted and failed. Right. So most people, like a lot of us, will ideate right? But I mean, let's be honest.
I hate to laugh about it, but man.
No, I mean, ideation is common, but like planning and acting is much less common. But but where it gets anti-intuitive, if someone has a really serious condition, the FDA is, if you're not exposing them to a lot of risk, just a little bit of improvement is important.
Yeah.
So
fascinating.
So I think, like, for instance, with there's a kind of brain stimulation that is approved for treating tumors and brain tumors, and the person wears the unit 24 hours a day.
And you said approved, not cleared.
Yeah.
Just to make sure this is a class 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I forget the name of the device, but you wear it 24 hours a day. It uses super high frequency stimulation, and it has been shown to reduce the mortality rate of brain cancer by a tiny little bit. Mm-hmm. But it's approved for that use.
But it's approved
because
tiny little bit.
A tiny little bit matters when it's mortality, right? So interestingly, like, if you get into the wellness space, one thing that the FDA has said is, like, look, if you're a healthy person, then any risk is greater than any potential benefit, because if someone's healthy, then there is no benefit really that you have to give, right? I mean, if someone's already healthy, then what could the benefit be? And therefore, if you're not really providing benefit, then any risk is greater than benefit. So that's where it gets like, oh, wait a minute, I see. And so now it's actually quite challenging in Europe and the U.S. to get a wellness, unless you're like in Europe, they've made it a higher class. So depression is class 2A or B in Europe. A wellness device is class 3. So Europe has made it class 3. FDA hasn't done that yet. There are some wellness indications that we can get that don't have that level of rigor, like for engaging in tasks that require focus and concentration. We can, if we've established the risk is very low, and like the job that's being performed, for instance, flying a plane, is you need focus and concentration. It almost gets into that category of disease state where it's like, okay, it is existential if your performance is not at the top. So there are these variations where you have to. It's interesting, these gray areas, and it does matter, but it's not always intuitive.
Yeah. Kind of walk us through just maybe a little bit of the company like journey. I know you touched on like some of it so far. In terms of like the devices and stuff like that being in the field. I mean, I think you touched on this earlier. I mean, it's fairly unique that you guys are still going for FDA clearance, yet you actually kind of have like quite a few devices that have like, been in the field, which I think is a really kind of interesting, unique opportunity that doesn't always kind of happen in this space, right? Yeah,
it's never going to happen again in our space. So we came into this when it was this strange, the category was being regulated in the same way. In 2009, it was being regulated in the same way it was in 1976.
Wow.
When the FDA first started regulating what's called cranial electrotherapy stimulation. I have in my office a wooden box with these brass, kind of bulbs that you put on either side of the head from like turn of the century. There were these electronic stim devices that people were marketing for sleep and mood. Some of them probably worked, but they didn't have like the trials structure back then.
They didn't know why, but if I hold these two light bulbs up to my head, fairly close, like I feel better in the morning.
So they grandfathered this strange category in. When we got to the scene, there were no brain stimulators in the category. It was vagal nerve, so people are having electrodes on the ears. Mm-hmm. Every cranial electrotherapy stimulation device except ours. And there, I think in 2018, there were something like 15 or 16 devices that had this. All of them were vagal nerve except for us. So anyway, we were able to kind of tack ourselves onto this category and market ourselves. And then, the FDA tried to modernize that in 2011, 2 years after I got started. They called for PMAs for depression, anxiety, and insomnia. And I spent the next, from 2011 to 2019, engaged in the FDA kind of back and forth, we had the equivalent of like congressional hearings, the FDA through a reclassification panel. We had to fight very hard to convince them that really anxiety and insomnia should be at the very least in class 2 because this device was so low risk. And we're responsible for the fact that there's a class 2 path today. They wanted, in 2011, they proposed class 3 for all indications. And that's where I got my education with FDA.
So they weren't going to just close the door on this category.
They were going to lock it.
They were going to lock it, and like you were going to have to definitely like get out.
Yeah, I mean a PMA
to get back through.
The user fee for a PMA is $400,000.
Yeah,
that's just the application fee. So like what startup?
Right.
Sorry.
It's all good.
You're good. You're good.
You can still hear me?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, the application. That would have been a very, very hard bar, and they at that time were going to require, the very highest level for all 3. And I think having it for one makes. I think having it for depression, I'm cool with that. I think that makes sense.
Kind of,
but not
previous
for,
conversation, right? I mean, the risk of having a device. Let's even just say side effects aside, danger to the patient. Obviously, that's always like first and foremost. But the risk of the device not having enough of a tenant effect is high, right? Particularly in a certain subset of that user group. Right?
Yeah, I mean, you can also be devil's advocate and say, well, the recidivism rate or the relapse rate for antidepressants is something like 85, 88%. Yeah. So, I mean, if your standard of care has an overwhelming failure rate in terms of relapse, there's arguments to be made on both sides. I ultimately like, because there's such a credibility gap with this category, I like that it's in the class 3 for those reasons.
Yeah. Well, even speaking, I think if I think selfishly for your guys' company, again, it's kind of back to this piece as if you can manage to climb that very high wall and get to the other side of it and prove the efficacy piece, right? I mean, it's obviously very good for your company, and it may, again, kind of open up just this whole new treatment pathway, right? That is non-drug based, therapy. Right?
Yeah, and that'll happen.
Amazing, right?
It will happen regardless. In that, as long as we're publishing depression data, which we have now twice, bipolar depression at Beth Israel Mount Sinai, and then this recent major depressive disorder study, you're going to get prescribers prescribing it for depression off-label because they know the data is out there. So just having the anxiety clearance.
Oh, that's an interesting take. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, off-label
that's
huge
really
here.
That's really, really big.
It's so comorbid.
Yes.
I mean, the comorbidity rate between the anxiety and depression is super high. So we're going to be treating depression
the overlapping
no matter
Venn
what.
diagrams are basically a circle, probably. Right?
Yes. So I think what getting the depression approval does is, A, the credibility of that. B, you can actually get reimbursed for depression, not just anxiety. So it expands your ability to get reimbursement, which is, by the way, that's the other reason to do a large-scale trial is I think a lot of entrepreneurs in this space who are learning it think, oh, if I just get through the FDA, I get reimbursement. That is absolutely not how it works.
Because you prove it's safe for use doesn't mean that the insurance
or even
carriers are gonna
effective
cover it. Right?
I mean, an insurance company is like, oh, you proved it's effective for 12 weeks. Well,
I don't want to pay for this forever for 12 weeks of benefit.
And it's like we want, like, the whole point of us insuring something is so that it reduces our costs. And we don't, if you can't show us that using your device reduces our costs, then we're not going to pay for it. And the only way you can do that is having quite long, like 1 to 2 year studies where you're not just tracking symptoms, you're tracking healthcare utilization, and you partner with a company like an IQVIA that literally has all of our healthcare utilization data.
Yeah.
That's very expensive. And so when you're recruiting these real world studies after you're on the market, if you can figure out how to get your device purchased without reimbursement, and then you start collecting this real world data over a year, you have to enroll enough subjects where you can actually, the IQVIAs can take your data set, and then only a percentage of them, they're going to have all of this health utilization data. So you have to go through that, and you have to have a credible enough clinical trial. So we'll have that credible clinical trial for insurance with our upcoming Mass General study for depression. And I think by the time we're done collecting real world evidence, we're going to have that for multiple. We'll have it for all of our approved conditions. So, anxiety, depression, insomnia. You want really robust data for the insurance piece. That's the whole business model.
And are you guys going to probably be a durable medical good? Is that the categorization?
Yes. So we're there's kind of two options that I see on that. One is you have just an upfront fee. The other is you can try to bill monthly. So a CPAP device, for instance, that you use for sleep apnea, they bill every month. You have to show adherence. We're moving more towards the upfront fee for DME, not doing the monthly. And I think we're not charging so much that, like at $1,500, that's a very rationalized upfront fee.
Especially when you compare it to ongoing depression, drugs, that kind of thing, right? I mean, that's literally
yes.
If you take a very crass look at it from an insurance company's perspective, I mean, that is like every single month now until forever, right? Yeah. Whereas again, theoretically, this is a device that could last years, right?
Yeah, we have a 5-year shelf life, and I think we don't have I think the real world evidence burden for us is not that high to show like a real economic reason to cover it. And if we wanted to be super greedy, I'll just use the word greedy. It's not greedy, but like
capitalistic.
If we're going to be capitalistic, it'd be like, hey, the value that we're really is more like, $6,000 a year, then we could charge $500 a month. If you want to go down that path of $500 a month, you have to show them that level of data, which is a much higher bar than trying to get the $1,500.
And it's efficacy, and people will actually adopt and use it. The adoption, this is where the IoT and med device comes in, is for you to passively collect the adherence data.
Yeah, they're likely not gonna say to us, we'll only give you money if you show us like a year of adherence.
Right.
And the real world, and we know this from our version 1 device, the utility of the device, some people use it every day for years. Other people will use it. There's a lot of use in the first few weeks, first week especially. But once symptoms are in remission, and for a lot of people, that's after the first week, they go down to a maintenance level. Mm-hmm. Some people, if they're symptom free for a couple of years, they will stop using it. If their symptoms come back, they use it again. So there's actually quite a few different long-term usage patterns that are still clinically relevant, but we wouldn't want to have to be so dependent on only one of those for reimbursement. So I think the recurring revenue piece will come from the software side, the app side, not an app that controls the device, but that we can, curate services. We can have some predictive, data, as we talked about when we start actually collecting brain data in future iterations. So, but yeah, we're very happy with the 90+% margin on the
sure.
Yeah.
Well,
good. Does being DME, do you think kind of have any like access concerns? I know that obviously like in the United States, like DME is typically kind of treated separately. Like there's sometimes separate pharmacies and different like ways of distributing that than, going into my local Walgreens and getting an SSI that's sitting on the shelf, for instance. Like, is there any concerns there? Or again, do you kind of view it as like, well, maybe a little bit harder to get up front, but then obviously then you're not having to constantly like renew prescriptions and do that kind of stuff? Is there an initial barrier that you feel like patients are going to have to overcome there?
It depends on the channel. DME? So I with Medicaid in certain states, you have to distribute through a durable medical equipment distributor that takes a third of your revenue.
Yeah.
With the VA, you tend to go through a sales and marketing distribution partner and then the VA. One of the things we're learning, we're in the VA now in a pilot study, and because this kind of technology is so new, as of right now, there's we're going through the department that would handle prosthetics.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
Now that will probably evolve as we scale into other medical centers, but so each channel has their own challenges. For direct to patient, which I defer, which is a telemedicine based e-commerce, which is how we sold a lot of version 1. It'll be how we sell version 2.
And can you guys just drop ship that?
Drop shipping.
Amazing.
Yeah. So we'll have
that, yep.
A reimbursement. Now, for commercial reimbursement, this is going to be mainly through employers. So employers that have adopted this as something that they cover. So it's not like all of a sudden, as long as you have Blue Cross, you can get this. It'll be like through these. It'll start with a handful of employers, and then more and more will.
And so
adopt
if
it.
they already support this telehealth
it's a little
channel.
different. So it's actually a lot like our PEO, Drew. So here at Glassboard, we have a PEO who provides our insurance, and TriNet, our PEO, actually provides a mental health care, I'll call it plus up, to our insurance that is not covered under Anthem or United or any of our other carriers. TriNet carries it. So we have a mental health hotline. There's a couple other services they'll offer.
I see. So
And that's
he
what
could
this will be picked
partner
up
with
by.
something like this and then sort of provide via telehealth a direct-to-consumer pathway. Is that the idea here?
It's still prescription.
Yeah.
But it's covered by
yeah.
this additional mental health coverage rather than your core health care.
And we're going to start with employers that 100% manage the financial risk and only use a Blue Cross to administer and manage, but don't take
Self-pay.
on risk.
Yeah.
So if the employer wants to take on the financial risk, that's it. Like the administrator doesn't care as much, and so you have to convince the employer of the value. And I think we're going to be convincing them of the value all day long, because it's like, if all we do is improve sleep in half of the employees, and it's probably be like in our clinical trial for depression, 88% of the subjects, these are moderately severely depressed women, 88% had a clinically meaningful reduction of symptoms in 4 weeks. Wow. So again, we're pushing up against the ceiling. Like, you're never going to get to 100%. And so I think the employers are good. If you get rid of depression symptoms, you miss less work, your productivity is higher, you consume, people with depression as a group in the U.S. consume more than twice the healthcare services as those who don't, hospitalizations, et cetera. So in a fairly short order, and by short order I mean like a year, we'll be able to show significant economic advantage. And I think we'll have to prove it out on a pilot study basis with employers at first, but then it'll start to catch fire. And you see this, there's plenty of precedents like Amada Health, Livongo. There's others that started with this model of doing these large employer pilots, and then other employers are like, oh yeah, I want that. And then there's a snowball effect.
Yeah,
that's super cool.
Yep. Now, the last topic I've got, because it's so rare we actually get to talk about prescription and hardware, and you guys in your IP moat are actually in this space. So one of the most exciting things, Kelly, you and I talked about, is that part of your intellectual property, your U.S. patents, is the prescriptive dose of waveform, electrons, et cetera. That is what you guys are claiming. That is actually how you modeled this. This is all about what you guys did with your electric field modeling to target the right areas of the brain and hit those areas that you need to get over, we'll call it the activation hump, right? So your treatment's effective. Combining that research with that intellectual property turns it into the prescription. So this is not only the IP moat, so no one else can just copy your waveform. This is the thing that people will prescribe to, this intellectual property that you have ran these clinicals on, and it ties we'll call it all aspects of the legal together in a very nice package with a bow on it. That this is what you have and that your company can hold sacred, and this should help protect you from competitors coming along. They'd have to come up with a different waveform that has the same efficacy. That honestly, I think that you have enough data that it took you long enough to figure the one that worked. This is probably not an easy nut to crack twice.
Yeah, and I think what we're expecting what we're seeing is that of the handful of devices that you could say are tangentially competitive. By tangentially, I mean they may have insomnia or anxiety or depression, but there's no device out there yet that I've seen except ours that is using the exact same usage protocol and stimulation parameters for all of these conditions. Right. And that is very rare to be able to do that. Typically, like there's one device out there that has one device for insomnia, one device for anxiety. They're very different. It's not a brain stimulator device. It's a vestibular nerve device, but they're different devices. Yep. So if you happen to have anxiety and insomnia, as many people who have those do, you would need two devices, yep. which just is that doesn't make sense. Yep. And so we're trying to compress the choice for the three most common conditions into one device. That takes a lot of time to be able to prove that.
Yep, amazing. Well, as we wrap up time here on the podcast, Kelly, thank you so much for coming in and flying all the way in.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
I'm so excited to work with you guys. I really blown away by the visit here today. You have an incredible team. So it's the people and the facilities. It's amazing. It's a lightning in a bottle.
Thanks.
We just have to hire all of our friends, write off all of our toys, and make money. We're still working on number 3. And Kelly, I'm going to take notes from you later when you take this thing to the moon. But 1 and 2 worked out pretty okay.
Yes. Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on, Kelly. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
We'll catch you guys all next time on the next episode of the Hardtech Podcast. See y'all.